Just a few days ago, we heard West Virginia Mountaineer wide receiver Cam Vaughn say, "I'm coming back. I'm a Mountaineer for life." Now, that has changed. Yesterday, Pete Thamel reports Cam Vaughn is entering or planning to enter the transfer portal beginning next week when it opens. What has changed? Did Cam Vaughn have a change of heart? Did Rich Rod and the West Virginia program have a change of heart? What is going on with Cam Vaughn, and is it time for West Virginia fans to panic over this likely loss to the program's top wide receiver? That's what we're talking about in today's live edition of Couz's Corner. Second half of the show, we are going to talk about West Virginia's 2026 schedule and why it's lining up to be potentially more manageable and an easier schedule than what we originally anticipated. And we'll talk about whether my expectations have changed or not going into 2026. So let's go ahead and talk about those two topics in this live edition, in this live show on this post-Christmas, pre-New Year's Sunday, December the 28th. I want to thank you all for joining. Now, I will likely not be doing much next week, if anything at all. I will be out of town most of the week, visiting family for New Year's, taking a trip out of town with the immediate family, visiting some extended family. So, taking a little vacation. So not sure how much you'll see me next week, if at all. That being said, the channel's not going anywhere. But, life has to move on, and I do need a little bit of a hiatus sometimes. So nonetheless, wanted to just share that with you real quick. Let's go ahead and dive in to today's show, and let's go ahead and talk about Cam Vaughn. It was very, very odd that this happens, this announcement that he's entering the portal happens just a couple of days removed from him going on TikTok Live and saying, "Hey, I'm coming back. I'm a Mountaineer for life." Something changed in that time period. Now, many fans are speculating, and it's all we can do really, because we likely will not know what exactly transpired behind the scenes. Did Cam Vaughn start hearing, "Hey, man, I can go get more money somewhere else"? Was his agent in his ear with that? In that 2 or 3 day time frame from the time he made that statement until yesterday? Did Coach Rodriguez and or the staff, a member of the staff, decide, what, we really can't afford to pay Cam what he wants, and we need to bring in other players out of the portal, we need to play ex players, whatever? Did they decide he just wasn't worth the money they needed to spend to keep him? Or was it something else? Was it just, is there an off the field issue that we don't know about? Is it a locker room issue? Is he not buying in all the way? Was the play where he loafed on the interception against Texas Tech? Does that play a factor? All of these are things we do not know. And we will likely never know. But who does know is Coach Rich Rodriguez. And it's like Whitey Williams from the Old Grad podcast always says on Twitter, and I'm paraphrasing, but he always says, "I need to remind you, everyone, not to panic when you see players enter the portal, because we don't know the behind-the-scenes details. We don't know the whole story." Rich Rod has a certain culture he wants to build. He needs certain players to fit that culture. And it's possible, again, we don't know, it's speculation, but it's possible that Cam Vaughn didn't fit culture. There were a lot of fans, myself included, who criticized him for the loaf play after the interception. I saw a lot of fans make other comments that they saw him quit on other plays during the season, and that his attitude just at times appeared to be off. I never really witnessed that, but again, I wasn't really looking for that either, so I could have missed something. Now, to sit here and say that losing Cam Vaughn is, not a big deal, that would be naive of me to say. Cam Vaughn was, in my opinion, and I've said this multiple times, I think he's an NFL caliber receiver. I really do. I think he's that talented. So to say this is not a loss at all would be naive and wrong in my opinion. But to say that we should panic about it, I think panicking and blowing it out of proportion is also the wrong way to go. For multiple reasons. Number one reason being, This is a run first, run heavy offense. Yes, you still need receivers to make plays. I'm not saying you don't. I'm not saying receivers don't matter in the offense. But I think they can win without somebody like a Cam Vaughn, even if they're not able to replace him with somebody equally as talented. I think they can still win. And secondly, if there's an off the field issue, if there was a locker room issue, if it was a culture issue, if it was a grades issue, whatever the issue, if it was an off the field, non-football related issue, you can't have that in your program. It could be toxic to your locker room. You can't show favoritism to one player over another. And I know some people don't agree with me. I know the Cold Country podcast on X seems to think you should be able to let Cam, and he's a friend of the show. I respect his takes. But he seems to think you should be able to let players do whatever they want to if they're talented enough. It doesn't work that way. That doesn't even work in the NFL, for crying out loud. You cannot be a locker room, and I'm not saying Cam was. I don't know, but if it's the case, you can't be a locker room cancer. You can't be doing things off the field that can get you and or the program in trouble. You have to keep your grades up. All of that plays a part in this, and sometimes fans seem to forget about that. And again, I never played at the college level, so I'm not trying to compare myself to Cam Vaughn by any stretch, but I have been in a locker room. And culture matters. If you don't have good team culture, if you don't have good team chemistry, if you don't have everybody bought in, it affects how well your team plays as a whole. Football is the ultimate team sport, and you have to have buy-in from every single individual on that team, especially the ones that are your key contributors and or your stars. It's a necessity. And if that wasn't happening, then you cannot let it continue, because it could spread throughout your program. I don't care how talented you are. And, I don't think we need to panic. When you look at some of the players being brought in, look at the transfer or the JUCO receivers, Kedrick Triplett, Keon Hutchins, two speedsters who can absolutely make plays in space, take the top off of defense, whatever you need them to do. Look at some of the freshman receivers coming in. Jaden Bray could be back, assuming he can stay healthy. And I think Jaden Bray, this might be a hot take to some, but I think Jaden Bray might be better than Cam Vaughn. We just haven't had a chance to see it yet because of his injuries. If Jaden Bray can stay healthy, he could be your wide receiver 1 next year, and you can build around him. You could have Rodney Gallagher back, who's a good receiver and a great leader and a great teammate from everything we've heard about him. And Jersey Ear makes a great point. I'm hoping some of the WVU beat writers can shed some light on the reasoning of how this went down, and I think they already have, Jersey, and I'm going to talk about that right now. It's a great segue. Let's go ahead and do it. First, I'm going to pull up a tweet from Mike Oste over at WV Sports Now. He reshared Pete Thamel's tweet about Cam leaving, and here's what he had to say. Let me go ahead and enlarge it so you can read it better. But it says, I'm actually not surprised at all. Even though he said he was staying in a video, and that had to warrant a story, which most of us did stories on that. We did one over at our website, WV Sports Chat. It says, I always knew people within the program were growing tired of his behavior, and he wasn't thought of as the top wide receiver fans once viewed him to be either. So according to Mike Oste, who is a beat writer for WV Sports Now, he's saying that people within the program were growing tired of his behavior. Again, that's not me saying that. It's Mike Oste, someone who is, in fact, a beat writer. Also saying that Cam was no longer thought of as a top wide receiver. So if he wants a bag, and Coach Rod doesn't think he deserves a bag, not only based on his performance, but also based on his quote-unquote behavior, then it was probably a mutual decision for him to enter the portal, or maybe he may have even been encouraged to enter the portal. So there's one example, and there's a second one I'm going to bring up as well. from Skylar Callahan over at West Virginia on SI. He actually did an article on this over at his site. Let me find it. All right, here's what it says. It says, the Cam Vaughn portal move makes more sense when you consider this detail. And he goes on to say, just a couple days after telling the whole world that he was a Mountaineer for life, West Virginia wide receiver Cam Vaughn announced that he would be entering the transfer portal. What happened? Remember those hard conversations head coach Rich Rodriguez talked about toward the end of the season? Well, this feels like one of them. And that conversation would have taken place earlier this month during exit interviews, weeks before this live stream. Did that conversation mean the staff told him they didn't have a spot for him in 2026? Not necessarily. Remember, Rodriguez said, and I quote, and I had forgotten about this quote, so I'm glad Skylar wrote this article, but here's what Skylar said. And this is a quote from one of Rich Rodriguez's press conferences. There are a handful of guys that are frankly going to be called to task a little bit and say, you need to show us in the next month or two that you're right for our program, or you're going to have to find a spot. If everybody's not disciplined and focused and doing the right things the right way and all that, then I ain't going to mess with them. They'll have to go somewhere else. We don't have a lot of those problems, but there are a few guys that are going to be up against it. They have the ability to make it right and have a great career here, but they also could mess up. And then they'll have to do their career somewhere else. Skyler goes on to say this wasn't a talent thing with Cam, nor was it a financial thing, as WVU has the means to be able to hold on to him. I also don't believe this was a situation where another school came calling with a, quote, big bag, essentially convincing him to enter the portal. That gets us back to the above quote. Assuming he was among those given time to prove he deserves a roster spot, a second conversation likely took place recently, informing him that parting ways would be best for both parties. And he goes on to say how talented Vaughn is and that a fresh start may do him some good as well. But that quote is one I had totally forgotten about, where Rich Rod basically, in a nutshell, said there are guys who are not really doing things the right way, and they have a month or two to show us that they will do things the right way, or they're going to be gone. And it's very possible Cam Vaughn, and again, I don't know if it's true, and we will never know for sure, probably, unless one of them comes out and says so. But it's possible he was one of those guys. Very possible. And again, I'm going to harken back and say, I do not care how talented you are. If you aren't going to do things the right way, you're going to hurt your team. And it will also show up in your performance at some point. That's the way sports work, especially football, the ultimate team sport where all 11 guys have to be working on the same page at the same time on every play. So I'm glad Skylar wrote that article because I had completely forgotten about that quote. And who knows, maybe the TikTok live stream in and of itself was something he shouldn't have been doing. Maybe that was ultimate straw that broke the camel's back, as they say. Who knows? Who knows? But you know who does know? Rich Rodriguez, a guy who has been coaching for over 20 years, nearly maybe 30 years now. He knows how to handle a locker room, and he knows how to handle players who may not be doing things the right way, and he knows what a locker room needs to look like. It's not his first rodeo. Let's trust what he's doing because I feel like he knows what he's doing, and he's going to do things the right way. And for whatever reason, Cam Vaughn's moving on. Again, from a talent perspective, it's a major loss. I'm not going to argue that. It would be naive for me to argue that. But we don't know the back end. We don't know the locker room. We don't know the classroom. We don't know the off the field. We don't know any of that. So I just think it's an overreaction for anybody to panic. We have good receivers coming in from the JUCO ranks. We have good receivers coming in from high school. We've got some good receivers, a few at least, already on the roster. I mentioned two of them already, Jaden Bray and Rodney Gallagher. And they're likely going to bring in some from the JUCO ranks, which gets us to my next part of the show. And Kevin Varney kind of hints at that. He's in the chat, who's a VIP member, says, I heard that someone really big is coming in at receiver via transfer portal. And that's something I want to talk about next. There's an article over at our site, wvsportschat.com, by our new writer, by the way, Clark Johnson over there. Go check this article out. But he talked about 3 wide receivers they're going to be in the portal or planning to enter the portal that West Virginia could potentially go after. I'm going to talk about all 3 of them here a little bit. Wyatt Young from North Texas is the first one. This past season at North Texas, he had 70 receptions, 1,264 receiving yards, and 10 touchdowns. He's a 6'1", 195 receiver. He's a Texas native. And, with Neil Brown coming in North Texas, Eric Morris leaving to go to Oklahoma State, my personal opinion is he will likely follow Eric Morris to Oklahoma State. So West Virginia may have to play against him next year. However, do not be surprised if West Virginia goes after him. Maybe they throw him a bag. Maybe they offer him a large sum of money to come to Morgantown. We will see. It'll be very interesting to see where that goes. A second receiver that's planning to enter the portal that West Virginia could go after is Brett Eskildson. I think I said his name right, from Iowa State. His coach, Matt Campbell, leaving to go to Penn State. Does he follow Campbell to Penn State, or could West Virginia get in the mix? Now, his stats are not as impressive as the ones I just read of Wyatt Young, but he did do it in a Power 4 conference at Iowa State. And Clark, in his article, which is an opinion piece, in his words, he says that Eskildson has similar size and skill set to that of Jeff Weimer, who we just had at West Virginia for one season, the transfer who came over from Idaho State. He came on at the end of the year and was arguably Scotty Fox's go-to receiver there in the last couple games of the season. And Clark says that he thinks Brett Eskildson is a similar type receiver. When you look at his size and his skill set, Eskildson had 30 receptions, 526 yards, and 5 touchdowns at Iowa State. Could be a good fit for Rich Rod in the offense. And then last but not least, we're staying in the Big 12. This would be a huge get for Rich Rod and the Mountaineers if they could get him. A guy who really played well against West Virginia in Morgantown, albeit in a loss, is Omarion Miller from Colorado. He claims to be entering the portal as well. He had 18 yards per catch on the year. That was his average, which was 17th in the country. On the year, he caught 45 balls for 808 yards and 8 touchdowns. So, now that, again, it would likely take a huge NIL check, an NIL bag to get someone like an Omarion Miller. But if West Virginia has the money they claim to have, and they just freed up some with Cam Vaughn leaving, could they go out and grab an Omarion Miller? Could they go out and grab a Wyatt Young or a Brett Eskildson? Obviously, Omarion Miller, of these 3 names, will be a bigger splash. We've seen with our own eyes his talent. He caught 6 balls for over 100 yards against the Mountaineers in Morgantown in that loss to the Mountaineers as he was playing for Colorado. That would be a huge get. He's very talented. But I think either of these other 2 guys will also be big gets. Look at the numbers Wyatt Young put up. 70 catches, 1,264 yards. Now, Eric Morris runs that air raid offense, so he's going to likely pass the ball a lot more than what Rich Rod's going to. So I don't expect Wyatt Young to be a Mountaineer, but I would not be surprised if they at least take a shot at him. I could actually see one of these other 2 guys being more likely, especially somebody like a Brett Eskildson. If he was able to play in a Matt Campbell culture, on a Matt Campbell team, I think he would fit in at West Virginia. But you let me know what you think in the comments, whether you're watching this live or whether you're watching this on the playback. Please let me know. Also, just like Bourbon Crazy said in the chat, please be sure to click that thumbs up button for me, guys. It really helps the algorithm, whether you're watching it live or on the replay. Kevin Varney says, I firmly believe that we're going to be in a great position next year, regardless who leaves. And I totally agree. Again, time will tell. When the portal window opens, West Virginia is going to lose some guys. How many of the guys so far? There have been, I'll say, 4 players that have left or planning to leave that I thought would be impact players next year. Obviously, Cam Vaughn, Jaheim White, Dior Hubbard, the 2 running backs, and then Israel Boyce, who also announced he would be entering the portal yesterday. That story kind of got overshadowed by the Cam Vaughn story. It looked like Israel Boyce was going to have a good career in Morgantown when he came in about 2 or 3 years ago under Neil Brown, but he's just another Neil Brown recruit that doesn't seem to be working out for Rich Rod and his staff. He gave it a year, he gave it a shot, didn't work. Now he's going to go elsewhere. Would not surprise me at all to see him land at North Texas with Coach Brown. The lack of stability in general, Mike Hudgens in the chat, in college football, I totally agree, man. It's maddening. It's frustrating. You cannot – look, I posted on Twitter yesterday. It's time for us to stop being overly loyal to players, man. We have to be loyal to our team, be loyal to our program. But the loyalty, buying jerseys and all that stuff, until the guy's a senior or even a junior maybe, I think all that needs to be thrown out the window. I hate to say that, but I just think why should us fans spend our hard-earned money supporting an individual player who's likely going to leave next year anyway? That's just how I feel about it. I didn't used to feel that way, but I do now. The instability, until they put some more guardrails around this thing and get this chaos under control, which is going to require either federal legislation or it's going to require them becoming employees and doing collective bargaining. One of those 2 things is going to have to happen in order to rein in all this chaos with the portal, with NIL, and all these other things. But until one of those things happen, we're going to continue to fight this battle, and us fans are going to continue to be frustrated. We have WVU Fan 13 in the house, who's also a VIP member. He says, Vaughn was ranked 176 in NCAA in yardage, tied 167 with 4 touchdowns, 179th in NCAA with 45.1 yards a game. In my opinion, not a huge loss. That's fair, WVU Fan 13, and he did have some moments where he had some drops. There were times where he looked like he didn't run the right route, those types of things. However, stats are not always the end-all, be-all. When West Virginia struggled to block people at times, they went through 5 quarterbacks. There was no stability at the quarterback position until the end of the season. I don't think stats tell the true story in the case of Cam Vaughn because of all the other struggles West Virginia was having as an offense. They didn't have a big running game to help their passing game. He didn't have another after Jaden Bray went down, he didn't have another big play receiver on the other side. And, Weimer came on later, but, that was at the end of the year. Most of the season, he did not have that other guy to complement him on the other side. So defenses were double-teaming Cam Vaughn at times. So I don't think stats are necessarily the end-all, be-all. However, I do agree with the fact, with your main premise or main point, that I don't think, is it a major loss from an ability standpoint, from a potential standpoint, a ceiling standpoint? Yes, I do think it's a big loss. But in the grand scheme of things, I don't think it's all that big of a deal. I like the receivers they have coming in. I had Kedrick Triplett on the show and interviewed him. Seems like a great young man. I think he's going to do things the right way. Keon Hutchins is another one coming in. Both have great speed. I think both can come in and contribute on day one. Add Bray to the mix if he stays healthy and comes back. You add Rodney Gallagher to the mix if he stays healthy and comes back. And all of that is great. I think all those guys can contribute. And then I have no doubt, like I mentioned earlier, he'll go out and find some help in the portal as well. So while I agree with your main point, I don't necessarily agree with using stats to back it up, just because stats can be skewed by the lack of help around him, like Mike Hudgens is saying. And Bourbon Crazy, you got a great point. You can buy a jersey. And by the way, there's a link in my description box where you can go to Fanatics and buy your custom jersey. You can get your own name on the back of that jersey. You don't have to get a player's name. You can get your own name on the back of the jersey. So go do that today. And you can click the Fanatics link in my description box. And even if you don't want to buy a jersey, you want to buy anything else with West Virginia on it or anything else for that matter, as long as you as long as you do it using my link and during the same shopping experience, I'll still get a small commission from that sale. And one more quick thing I want to share with you before we move on to the next topic, and that is a tweet that, speaking of the JUCO guys that are coming in, Kedrick Triplett put out a great tweet. Or actually, it was a reply to a tweet about the Cam Vaughn situation. The tweet was put out, the original tweet was put out by a Twitter account or X account called WVU Recruiting. They reposted Pete Thamel's announcement about Vaughn and said, what, ... Well, underneath it, Kedrick Triplett, the JUCO receiver who's coming to Morgantown, says, and I quote, "We finna win, y'all. Just saying. Chill." And obviously, just saying, he put in, just used the word letters JS for short, but that's what it means. So Kedrick Triplett is confident that West Virginia is going to win. WVU Recruiting responded by saying, "We not worried, my boy, just blindsided, kind of lied to." West Virginia fans felt lied to because of Cam Vaughn making the statement on his live TikTok that he was coming back. But I think we need to be careful about calling Cam a liar because maybe he intended to come back. It may not have been his intention to leave. It could have been a coaching decision. Let's not forget, not every transfer is a player's decision. And us fans sometimes forget that. We want to get mad and blast them on social media, and I'm guilty of doing it. So I'm talking to myself here. I'm preaching to myself here. Sometimes we want to get mad at the players and say they're not loyal, yada, yada. It may not have been a player's decision. We won't know that because you don't want players. You don't want to burn bridges in anything in life, really. But if the program, you've got HIPAA things to deal with, HIPAA violations you don't want to commit. And then you've got just the privacy of the player. You don't want to ruin the player's reputation and ruin any chance he has to play at another school by putting bad things about him out there. If there are negative things going on behind the scenes, you don't want to put that out about a player. It's just not how you do things. It's just not the right thing to do. And B, it could hurt you later on down the road with recruiting. What player would want to come play for a program who badmouths players on their way out the door? Okay. And secondly, from the player, if it's a player's decision, they don't want to bash the school as they leave because who knows, there may come a time the coaches on that staff might could help that player out down the road. Or they may want to come back to that team at some point in the future. You don't want to burn bridges, not in college sports or in any sport, but especially really anything in life. You do not want to burn bridges because you never know when the person you just burned may be the same person who can help you out later in life, and they won't do it because you burned them going out the door. So for multiple reasons, I know some fans don't like it because in essence, we are helping pay these players in a lot of ways. But I just, for the protection of the players and the program, you cannot put that stuff out to the public, in my opinion. It's just, you've got to handle that stuff behind closed doors. Yes, sometimes players post stuff on social media, but that's up to them. When they do that, sometimes they're probably burning some bridges that they probably shouldn't be burning. WVU Fan 13 adds, if it was a coaching decision, and we say we trust Rich Rod in his coaching and decision making, then that tells me a lot about what the coaching may feel about what Vaughn can offer WVU next season. And look, it's fair to criticize Coach Rod and the coaching staff, and there are many who say if it was a coaching decision. I mean, Country Roads podcast even went as far as to say Coach Rod should be fired if it was his decision. Again, I think that's a huge overreaction because we don't know the behind the scenes. And I think I actually a little bit frustrated at some of that reaction because to make it seem like talent is way more important than culture and attitude and stuff like that is just off base. I really feel like that's off base. I don't care how talented you are. If you are a locker room cancer, you will affect your team's ability to win games. Your teammates aren't going to like you in some cases. You can cause division. If you have players who, sometimes locker room cliques can form, that's not good for a locker room. And again, is this what happened here? I don't know, but it's very possible. When you look at the words of Mike Ostie, which I shared earlier, when you look at the article written by Skylar Callahan and what Rich Rod said in a press conference a few weeks ago, and you look at the fact he did this, what he said on TikTok Live, and then a couple days later says he's entering the portal. Guys, connect the dots. That's all I'm asking. Connect the dots. Pretty easy to do here, in my opinion. It's all speculation, but I think you can connect some dots if you really follow the tea leaves, which is what I like to try to do here on the show as much as I can. All right. Now, let's go ahead and jump to the second half of the show in a minute, which basically I'm going to talk about West Virginia's chances to win in the Big 12 in 2026 in football. So, they finished 4-8 overall this year, 2 wins in the Big 12, upsetting Houston on the road, and obviously the win over Colorado at home. They also had the big win in the backyard brawl. But when you look at West Virginia's schedule, it's some interesting things. But before we do that, though, I do want to give a quick shout-out to our channel sponsor here, Appalachia Digital. I mentioned earlier the website we have over at wvsportschat.com. You can also just type in couzscorner.com, couzscorner.com. It'll take you to the same page. But Appalachia Digital are the fine folks who designed that website. They can design you a website. If you're looking to get into the podcast world, if you're looking to, do a blog, if you're looking to start a small business, or if you already have a small business and you want to start a website, go check them out, appalachiadigital.com/Couz. That lets them know I sent you. Or if you have a website already and you just want to upgrade it, you want to level up, you want to get found easier on Google, they do that too. They optimize in SEO and helping your site become more visible to others. So go check them out, appalachiadigital.com/Couz. Let them know I sent you. Now, let's go ahead and jump in. When you look at West Virginia's football schedule for next year, I'm not going to do a screen share. And the dates and times of these games have not been determined yet, outside of the first 3 non-conference games. But the conference schedule has not been determined yet as far as when the games are going to be played. Only thing we know is who they're playing. We do know who they're playing. In the 3 non-conference games, you've got Coastal Carolina to start the season on September the 5th in Morgantown. That's followed up by the FCS opponent UT Martin in Morgantown. And then the neutral site game in Charlotte at Bank of America Stadium against the Virginia Cavaliers on September the 19th. 2 of those 3 teams, or at least, one of those 3 teams, I don't know about UT Martin. I don't follow them. But Coastal Carolina will be replacing their head coach. Tim Beck was fired after a 6-6 season, and Ryan Beard former Missouri State coach, has been hired to take over the Coastal Carolina program. So Coastal Carolina will be breaking in a new coach. So not only the fact that it's a G6 opponent, but it's one who will be breaking in a new coach, and it's at home. That should be a win for West Virginia. Again, can't take them for granted, but it does bode well for the Mountaineers. Obviously, they should beat their FCS opponent, UT Martin. Now, the game against UVA's program is on the rise. They had a really good season, played in the ACC championship game. They're going to have continuity, at least it appears, on their coaching staff. However, Chandler Morris, their quarterback, based on my research, appears that he will be leaving. I think this was his last year of eligibility. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure Chandler Morris, the quarterback at Virginia, will be leaving. So Virginia should be replacing their starting quarterback, in 2026. Hopefully now West Virginia, we don't know who West Virginia quarterback's going to be either, so maybe that's a moot point. But it's definitely, I think it gives the Mountaineers a little better chance knowing that UVA will be trying to break in a new quarterback in 2026. Now let's go ahead and look at the conference schedule. Now, again, we don't know the dates of these games. All we know is the game, who they're playing, and whether it's on the road or at home. Their road games for next year, they have only 4 road games in Big 12 play and 5 home games. The 4 road games are at Iowa State, at TCU, at Texas Tech, and at Utah. 2 of those 3 teams are replacing their head coaches, both Iowa State and Utah. Now, Utah has elevated Morgan Scouty, their defensive coordinator, who's been the head coach in waiting for a couple years now. He's now being elevated to head coach. That should help with some continuity. However, it would not surprise me to see a few assistants leave to join Kyle Whittingham at Michigan. And it would not surprise me to see a few of the players leave to join Kyle Whittingham at Michigan. So it's possible that Utah could go through a little bit of a rebuild next year. Now, maybe not. Again, all this is to be determined once the transfer portal opens and we see how many Utah players leave and we see how many coaches go from Utah to Michigan to join Kyle Whittingham. Now, Devin Dampier should be back next year if he doesn't leave. So Utah likely won't be replacing their quarterback, but they will be replacing their head coach and maybe some of their staff and maybe a large part of the roster. Now you look at Iowa State, another road game on the Big 12 slate. Obviously, we know the story. Matt Campbell left to go to Penn State. Rocco Becht, the starting quarterback, entering the portal. I mentioned wide receiver Brett Eskelson entering the portal. A lot of the Iowa State players, some of their key contributors, have already announced their intention to enter the transfer portal. So Iowa State appears that they're going to be going through another rebuild with their new coach that's coming in next year. That now doesn't mean that Jack Trice won't still be a tough place to play. Doesn't mean that Iowa State's going to be a bad team. I still think they'll be a well-coached team. But they could be going through a rebuild, and they will be replacing their starting quarterback and their coach. So 2 of West Virginia's 4 road games in the Big 12 involve teams replacing their coaches and likely a large part of the roster. Now, the other 2, TCU, Josh Hoover has announced he's going to the transfer portal. So TCU, yes, Sonny Dykes will be back. They have lost their offensive coordinator already. He left. Kendall Browse left to go to South Carolina to join their staff, so he'll be gone. And it looks like Josh Hoover will be leaving the program as well, their starting quarterback. So who will they have at quarterback at TCU next year? Who will be, I don't remember who they hired at offensive coordinator, but, they're going to be breaking in a new offensive coordinator. How does that work out? And then, obviously, you've got the road game at Texas Tech. I expect them to be a well-oiled machine again next year. They will be losing Rodriguez at linebacker. They will be losing Baron Morton at quarterback to graduation. But Texas Tech still has a lot of money to spend. They still have a good culture built there under Joey McGuire. Continuity on their staff, it appears. So, Texas Tech, I expect, will be good again next year. Now, will they be as good as they are this year? Not so sure, but I expect them to go out in the portal, replace Baron Morton with another good quarterback, and continue to play good football next year. Now you look at the home games. West Virginia gets 5 home games next year in Big 12 play. They are against Arizona, Houston, Oklahoma State, Kansas, and Cincinnati. Now, at first glance, my first thought is that is not, and no offense to those schools, but the home slate for West Virginia next year, not nearly as attractive as it's been in recent years. We obviously there's no Pitt. There's no P4 opponent coming to Morgantown in non-conference. We've had Penn State in recent years. We've had Pitt in recent years, even Virginia Tech, 5 years ago. Last year we had Colorado, Utah, new teams coming to Morgantown for the first time. Well, or at least since they joined the conference anyway. This year, not quite as exciting, but you do have, Cincinnati coming to town, who's playing winning football again, and they're somewhat of a rival, Big East rival. You have Kansas, again, Oklahoma State, Houston, Arizona. Now, when you look at those schools, once again, you have Oklahoma State, who's going to be breaking in a new coach in Eric Morris, a new quarterback. Would not surprise me if Mestamaker follows him from North Texas, and a new staff and a largely new roster. You've got Kansas, who will likely be replacing, or who will be replacing, rather, Jalen Daniels. He's been there for, it seems like, a decade now. He's finally going to be graduating and gone. Who will be the quarterback at Kansas next year? Lance Leipold will still be there, Most of the staff will still be there, but Kansas will be breaking in a new quarterback. Cincinnati. Brendan Sorsby has made it known he's planning to enter the transfer portal. So Cincinnati may be breaking in a new quarterback next year. So Cincinnati, Kansas, and Oklahoma State will all be breaking in new quarterbacks, and Oklahoma State will be breaking in a new coach. Now, Houston, Arizona, looks like they're going to have some continuity. Arizona played really good football down the stretch of the season. It appears Noah Fafita will be back for his senior year. He seems to love it at Arizona. Seems like he's happy playing for Brent Brennan and that staff, so he will likely be back. So Arizona should be a really tough opponent in Morgantown with some continuity. Houston, Willie Fritz just won a bowl game over LSU. There's going to be continuity at Houston. I expect Connor Wigman and some of their top players to be back. That's going to be a tough game. They're coming off a 10-win season, and they're going to have payback on their minds from West Virginia beating them and knocking them out of Big 12 conference, knocking them out of the Big 12 title race earlier this year. So that's going to be a tough one. But of the 5 home opponents, 3 of them are going to be breaking in either a new quarterback and head coach. So there are some games. So 5 of West Virginia's Big 12 opponents next year are either breaking in a new quarterback, a new coach, or both. And again, those are Iowa State, new coach, new quarterback. TCU, new quarterback. Texas Tech, likely a new quarterback. Utah, new coach, maybe a new quarterback. Oklahoma State, new coach, new quarterback. Kansas, new quarterback. Cincinnati, new quarterback. So at least it looks like 6 out of the 9 opponents will be breaking in a new quarterback, potentially. So there are some opportunities there for the Mountaineers to get wins in Big 12 play next year. Now, I have said on this show many times, or at least a few times, that West Virginia is also going through another rebuild of their own. They're going to have at least 39 true freshmen on the roster, 10 JUCO players on the roster. It'll take those players time to grow accustomed to playing at the P4 level. So almost, 40%, 45% of your roster almost is going to be made up of brand new players who have never played at this level before. So it would be naive for us to think that West Virginia's going to come out and compete for in my opinion anyway. Now, maybe they surprise me. Maybe they overshoot expectations. And I'm sure Coach Rod is expecting them to do that because that's how he's wired. But as fans, I think we need to still be realistic. Despite these teams breaking in new quarterbacks and those types of things, we still need to be careful about, getting our expectations way too high with so many new players. You add in the 49 players they recruited on signing day, he's likely going to bring in at least probably 15 players out of the transfer portal. So West Virginia is likely going to have about 60 to 65 new players at least going into the season. Last year they had 81. Won't be quite that bad, I don't think. And they will at least have a core of guys on the roster to build around and continuity on the coaching staff. And a lot of those guys will be coming in spring, whereas last year they did not. So there are some advantages. So therefore, I do expect West Virginia to be a better team and have a better record next year. And I think what I just talked about with the new coaches, the new quarterbacks in the league, that's going to help. And heck, even though BYU's not on the West Virginia schedule, there's talks that BYU could be losing a lot of their assistant coaches and even coordinators to Michigan because a lot of them have ties to Kyle Whittingham. So BYU might even take a step back next year. And even though they're not on West Virginia's schedule, it will open the door potentially for new teams to compete at the top of the league. BYU's been one of the top 4 teams in the league 2 years in a row. It might be tougher to get there if they lose people like Jay Hill, who's rumored to be the top DC candidate for Whittingham at Michigan, and others. That could hurt BYU. Not saying BYU won't still be a good team because I do like Kalani Sitake. I like their culture and I like their roster. But, if there's a year West Virginia could exceed expectations and surprise people, it could be next year based on their schedule, based on the new coaches in the league, and based on the fact BYU could potentially take a step back due to what they could lose from their staff. So all of those things laid out, Let me know what you think about West Virginia's expectations for 2026. And also, am I barking up the wrong tree here and thinking some of these teams and quarterbacks or some of these teams could be easier than we expected due to losing coaches and or quarterbacks? Let me see what you guys have to say in the comments. WVU Fan 13 says those 4 away games will be tough as well. Home against Arizona and Houston will be tough games. It could be a 6-6 season. That's what I'm saying. E. Collier 100 in the house. He says, why are people so worried about half-ass players leaving? Cam's attitude and effort are half-ass. Fair enough. We've got Veritax in the house. He says people forget that Cincinnati and West Virginia used to play a lot when West Virginia was an independent too. I did forget about that, Veritax. Great point. He also says last year was so bad we don't even know who our quarterback is going to be next year, do we? So without knowing that, it's hard to know if losing receiver is going to have that much impact. Another fair comment. We've got Chevy Diesel 1776 says Cam is talented, no doubt, but what I saw him do on several occasions this year, the kicking at the defensive player and the loaf and the dancing when we were losing is a turnoff to me. All great points and stuff I totally agree with you on. We've got Seymour Wang in the house. He says, I wish him the best. Something changed in the second half of the year, and Weimer became our go-to wideout. That kind of goes along to Mike Ostie's point that he made in his tweet. And I'm going to read it again. This is Mike Ostie, a beat writer who covers West Virginia for WV Sports Now. He says, I'm actually not surprised at all. Even though he said he was staying in a video, and that had to warrant a story, I always knew people within the program were growing tired of his behavior, and he wasn't thought of as the top wide receiver fans once viewed him to be. And Skylar Callahan talked about a quote Rich Rod made in a presser where he said, and I'm paraphrasing, there were a handful of guys on the roster who needed to prove that they were going to do things the right way over the next couple months. And if they didn't prove that, they were going to have to move on and finish their career elsewhere. Is Cam in that? Was he one of those guys? Now, again, Rich Rod's never going to single guys out by name, but it's possible he was in that category. That's why we don't need to overreact to this, in my opinion. A, don't call Cam a liar because he may not have known he was not going to be returning next year when he made that statement. And B, don't overreact if it was a coaching decision saying Coach Roth should be fired for getting rid of our most talented player because talent is not everything. You have to have the will, you have to have the heart, you have to have the attitude, you have to have the buy-in, all of that as well as the talent. The talent will only take you so far. You have to have everything else to go along with that talent, and maybe Cam Vaughn didn't have it. And I know one of the arguments is, well, why didn't he know that when he was at Jacksonville State? They were winning at Jacksonville State. Sometimes an individual's true character don't show itself until they're faced with adversity. And maybe the adversity that West Virginia faced a ton of adversity last year, especially on the offensive side of the football. And you can see, how is a person going to handle adversity? Are they going to pout? Are they going to whine? Are they going to complain? Or are they just going to fight through it, deal with it like men, and roll on and be a team first guy? That's the difference. It's also at a higher level. Players are also making more money now. That can change their perspectives and their attitudes. All of those things have to be taken into consideration here, in my opinion. And I trust the decisions made by the coaching staff, if it was a coaching decision. And if it was Cam's decision to move on, then so be it. They'll replace him with somebody else. We've got Swabby G in the house, who's a channel member, Appalachia Africa Twin. He says, bad attitudes can easily override all the talent in the world. Amen, brother. I agree with you 100%. Vertex agreed with something I said earlier. Bad attitudes tend to cluster, and they infect everybody else because if just a few people aren't playing right, the whole team suffers. Exactly what I talked about earlier. You tend to get you can start to get cliques forming in a locker room, which causes division, which causes the team not to play well. And Rich Rod is not going to allow that stuff to happen. It's that simple. Doesn't matter how talented you are. That stuff's, and again, it's total speculation. We don't know if that was the reason. but there are some red flags and some things pointing in that direction, especially when you look at what was stated by Mike Ostie and Skylar Callahan. Well, I want to thank you all for hopping onto this live show today. Please be sure to hit the thumbs up button at the bottom, whether you're watching live or watching on the replay. Also, be sure to, if you're watching on the replay on your mobile device, you might see a button below that says hype between the download button and the thanks button. Please press that for me. Please share it with your family and friends. Please subscribe to Couz's Corner if you haven't yet. I really appreciate everybody tuning into this show. Again, you won't see me much next week. I'm taking a little vacation, but go check out our writers over at wvsportschat.com. They'll be putting written content out over there all week. And don't worry, I will be back in a few days. But I appreciate everybody hopping on and joining the show. Wish my Bills good luck today against the Philadelphia Eagles. Hope they can pull off a win. Hope the rest of your day's top shelf. God bless. And Q Country Roads.